I want to welcome you to the Ask Jeff YouTube channel. Here's today's question, and somewhat lengthy one. Matthew chapter 7, verse 21 through 23 are quite terrifying verses. Yes, they are. One of the worst things I can imagine Christ saying to anyone, can you tell me who these people are? They seem to be Christians, or are these people who thought they had to add to their salvation? Also, these aren't, quote, non-believers, since they know Christian, quote, works. Did I just answer my own question? Well, you go to that famous passage in the book of Matthew chapter 7. It's at the conclusion of what we know as the Sermon on the Mount. Now think about the Sermon on the Mount just kind of as a holistic picture here. Jesus Christ has a bunch of Jewish people who have lived their entire life by a sacrificial system, believing that if they do the right thing at the right time and in the right manner, they have a right relationship with God. What does Jesus Christ masterfully in the Sermon on the Mount do? He begins to pick apart that piece by piece. There are times that you have handled your finances wrong, your family wrong, your body wrong, and by the time you get to chapter 7, there is nobody who can do an introspection of their own life and say, oh, I am right with God. That's why it ends with this famous story about two men who build a house. One builds on a rock, one builds on the shifting sand. And when the rains came, only one house survived. The whole point of the Sermon on the Mount is Jesus Christ basically saying, if you build your life on anything but me, it's not going to work out. You say, what does this have to do with the question? Because the verses alluded to about those who stand before him, and he says, depart from me, I never knew you. And they say, but we did good works. We prophesied in your name. That is the passage right before the illustration of the two men in the house. In other words, this frightening passage, which it is the conclusion to the Sermon on the Mount. So here's what Jesus is saying. After all I've told you, don't come one day to judgment and say, I never missed church. Don't come to one day to judgment and say, oh, I taught Sunday school for 50 years. In fact, one of the things that we do in evangelism, we call it the diagnostic question. Let me give credit where credit's due. This comes from the famous program known as Evangelism Explosion, which simply is based on these verses that you find so frightening. If you were to stand before God right now at his heaven and he were to ask you, why should I let you in? What would you say? Well, what did these people say? Oh, we did good works. We served. We built houses. We fed people. He's like, depart from me, I never knew you. There's no amount of, quote, works that we can do to somehow earn that position in eternity. And the essence of the Sermon on the Mount is we can't do it on our own. So why are those verses so frightening? Because there are some people, in fact, there's a lot of people who think just because they're a Baptist or just because they go to church or just because they don't cheat on their spouse that they're going to heaven one day. And what Jesus basically says is, no, I never knew you. One must acknowledge their sin condition and confess Jesus Christ as their Savior. End of story. Great question. If you have one, send it to AskJeff.net. Maybe your question will be tomorrow's. Thanks for being a part of today's daily question. Now, we answer a question each and every day. Please feel free to submit a new question at AskJeff.net. We may not have gotten to yours today, but we eventually will continue to be a part of this. Subscribe so you don't miss out on a question every day.